It's absolutely delightful to be here with you today. It's been a long time since I've been in a forum like this, so I want to thank all the staff and the senior members of TEXPERS for hosting us for a great conference. I have the pleasure today of introducing Ari Rastegar. A little bit about Callan for those who are less familiar with us. We're a domestically based institutional investment consultant. We manage approximately 400 clients with approximately $3.5 trillion in assets. The vast majority and significant portion of what we do is with folks in the public fund space. So it's delightful to be here with you. If I were to say, I have a bit of technical difficulty here. If I were to say why our clients work with us, it's because our deep expertise of our consultants, our expertise in the alternative asset classes, as well as for those who are interested in socially responsible investing, as well as investing with diverse managers and emerging managers. We do quite a wonderful job there as well. I would say, in thinking about this next speaker, one of the things that will strike you, as has struck me, is the wealth of knowledge that he has. He's an incredible powerhouse, both intellectually and personally, and just an all-around great guy. You've certainly heard of the Oracle of Omaha. I'd like to introduce you very shortly to someone who's been called by Forbes the Oracle of Austin. He's one of the top real estate investors, top 100 real estate investors as well. And he's also a guy who's got a great story on his background. He started his firm with $3,000 in capital when he was in law school and has grown it to invest in over 38 cities, 12 states, and has invested in 7 different asset classes. So he's got a wealth of experience. He's a fun guy. He brings a lot of energy, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Ari Rastegar.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. First and foremost, I'd like everybody to give a big round of applause for all the TEXPERS staff and all the great work they've done to bring us together today. Look, what I'd like to do today is you're going to be hearing from some of the greatest minds in our state and from around the country that have come in to share with you differing strategies to help your pensioners achieve their goals. And my hope today is to give a broad explanation to demystify, for lack of a better word, some of the words I don't even understand, quite frankly, so that as these experts come up and explain their strategies and explain how they can serve you, you will then be able to, my hope is to soak in that knowledge at a deeper level so that you can then go in and implement those strategies for your pensioners, if appropriate, with the allocations. So what TEXPERS does is imperative to educating not only the pensioners, educating not only the managers, but really educating the state in best practices and bringing all of us together so that we have a further alignment in what the goals of the state of Texas are and all the people that we actually support. I want another round of applause for all the people here that are supporting the pensioners that have been helping us through the last 2 years of all these very difficult times. One of the first topics that we're going to talk about is what is a fiduciary? I remember being in law school having a lot of trouble pronouncing that word. It was like fiduciary. I remember just it being a tongue twister. Effectively, a fiduciary, as many of us know, is someone who puts their clients' interests ahead of their own. And to most of us in this room, that feels like an obvious. Of course we're going to put our clients' interests above our own. Unfortunately, in reality, that doesn't always happen. And in this particular instance, one of our speakers will help to explain how important this is more than ever during this time, especially with many pensions that might have suffered losses over the past couple years, are seeking to reach their actuarial rate of returns, which many funds are struggling to do. It's not difficult, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult landscape at this moment. But in this process, I would pay close attention to understanding those responsibilities as that speaker comes. One of the biggest topics that we're hearing about today is this concept of inflation, okay? Inflation in a nutshell is that your eggs cost more at the grocery store, okay? So for someone like me who's, pretty simple in this regard, I have to kind of break it down to its most basic level. And as inflation starts to happen and the dollar doesn't go as far as it once did, how do you quell that? How do you control that? And the way that we do that systemically is by raising interest rates. So inflation hit its highest level in over 30 years recently, which we've noticed in our gas prices, we've noticed it in our everyday living, we've noticed it in our basic necessities of life. So it's a real issue. There are ways to capitalize on inflation, which we'll get into a little bit earlier, which pose tremendous opportunities. But in a nutshell, we're going to be, we believe that the Fed will continue to raise rates, and there's been a lot of indication of that, at least 25 to 50 basis points consistently over the next year or so. So paying close attention to what inflation is and how to hedge against that will be very important. Real estate, which is our core competency, is one of the greatest hedges systemically against inflation. And a simple example is, if you were to go buy a house for $100,000 and inflation were to reach 30%, just to use a larger generalized example, your house is automatically worth $130,000 by that market standard of that day. Other hard assets are also hedges against inflation, such as gold, such as art. Real estate tends to be historically the safest option in order to capitalize when you're in an inflationary environment. If you look at some of these markets throughout the United States from a real estate vantage point, you'll see Austin, Texas, which is the headquarters of our firm and actually my hometown, has experienced the highest rent growth of any city in the United States of America, which is an astounding number because Austin really is not entirely sure it's a city yet. I still kind of think it's a town on steroids, but we can start to see it's becoming more and more relevant. What is an emerging market? So this one shocked me a little bit. Would anybody here raise their hand and think that China is an emerging market? Does anyone think China is an emerging market? Any hands? Any hands? Any hands? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It is 7. It is the #1 largest emerging market in the world. Emerging, China, which was shocking to me. Another one of the emerging markets to watch are India. And what makes an emerging market in the most simplistic form? Brazil, which by the way poses the 9th largest economy in the world on a GDP basis. Just a quick little tidbit, Texas just surpassed them. If we were a sovereign nation from a GDP basis, we would be bigger than Brazil. Astounding. What makes an emerging market? Essentially, there are a few factors that play into what this means. One of the keys is the disparity or the difference between the rich and the poor on an income earning basis. So in countries like India and China, although massive economies, massive business growth, there is still such a gap between the rich and the poor that it poses this amazing opportunity for growth to still exist. South Africa, Brazil, India, Russia, these countries in our minds, certainly in mine at first blush, we're emerged, but there's still a lot of room for growth in those areas. And the experts that will speak on these topics will elaborate in further detail. Infrastructure. I'm sad to say that as the richest country on planet Earth, or in the history of mankind, we rank 13th on the list of infrastructure problems in the world, which seems astounding with the amount of wealth and capability that we have to be number 13. And it's something that we really cannot take for granted. I mean, these are our buses, our sewers, our subways, our water systems, the things that actually let us live the lives that we live that we don't really think about. So there's a tremendous opportunity, whether through private equity or other modalities, to capitalize on the improvement of the infrastructure, not only here in the United States, but globally and abroad. It's actually something that is quite concerning for cities that are growing at massive speeds. Supply chain logistics issues as well feed into this issue. More about that as your speakers come. Some of the trends here: just-in-time infrastructure, digital natives, and a bunch of words that I don't entirely understand all the definitions to, but I'm sure they will explain this in much detail. But there is no question that the need to revamp the infrastructure of the United States of America is paramount, and it's now becoming more on the forefront of people's minds, and I look forward to seeing those transitions. This is a very important topic. Sounds a little bit boring. Funding Soundness Restoration Plan. Sounds like a lot of words, but it affects real people. What does it mean? It means when a public fund is not meeting their actuarial rate of returns, has experienced losses, and is not able to serve their retirees, a funding restoration plan is put in place in order to revamp the protocols, whether it's through asset allocation, whether it's through new consultants, new strategies, new theses. But this is a safeguard to protect, the hard-earned retirement dollars of the pensioners that these individual pensions represent. Spectrum of public and private credit. Credit's a fancy way of saying debt, whether that's mortgages, and this spectrum is enormous. It can go all the way from the mortgage on your house. It can be the bond that you buy from Apple. And the way that we can understand this is the credit worthiness, or the viability, or the credibility, for lack of a better word, of the companies that we are loaning money to. For example, if you were to buy a bond from Apple, that would have a certain level of rating, a certain level of credibility, and a much higher chance of repayment, versus maybe a bond issued by a local gas station with one single section would be considered a higher yield bond, or in other words, or in other nomenclatures, what's called a junk bond. Doesn't necessarily mean it's junk, but this is the spectrum that we'll be speaking about, which also poses huge opportunities in environments that have raising interest rates. So this is something to pay particular attention to, because the downside risk is much less in credit than it is in equities, but it's a give and take. Taking a little less risk in this regard would generate more conservative returns, but we'll let managers that look at these things that are much smarter than me figure out how that asset allocation bubble would work. We've been seeing an unbelievable amount of volatility in the markets, okay? For many years, the markets were priced to perfection. Now it's up and it's down. What causes volatility in its most simplistic form? It's really one word: uncertainty. People don't know. And for the past couple years, to say that we've lived in an uncertain environment, I think would be the understatement, of certainly the past 10 years. But there's an old saying on Wall Street. I was in New York for many years working under some of the greatest minds, not only in the finance but in the real estate business. And I heard a common cliche, and cliches being cliches for a reason, as we know, I've come to believe, that bulls make money, okay? Markets are rising, bulls make money, bears make money, pigs get slaughtered. This, again, on its face, could be a difficult thing to navigate, but understanding volatility right now and what that poses is mission critical to understanding where the markets are going. Some of the issues that we talked about today might paint a bit of a dismal picture of some of the problems that we're facing. A lot of the things that we spoke about in giving an overarching introduction to all the great speakers that you'll be seeing over the coming days. Being a self-confessed research data freak, I have never been more confident in the state of the American economy and the ability to create generational wealth. We are looking at population migration trends that happen once every 100 years at best. I was joking the other day on Fox News that, you know, California and New York are the land of the flea, and Texas is the land of the free. Here in Texas, we are open for business. Here in America, we are open for business, and navigated properly with the right consultants, the right guidance, the right experts, individuals like Mr. Joy, who is gracious enough to do the introduction up here, are going to help create one of the most robust economies in the history of mankind. As I look through this audience, I see unbelievable people that have been fighting for their pensioners, fighting for their plans, doing the best things they possibly can. Today, Dr. John Scott is with us today, who's a Board of Regents member at UNT, who's doing everything in his power to help revamp some of the education plans as well. And hopefully, if we talk a little further, maybe he'll run for president. So make some time to speak with him. I want to thank all of you all for being here today. I want to thank all of you for being here the next couple days and listening to these speakers. They are here with the utmost good faith. I want to thank all the volunteers that have helped to make all of these things possible. And most importantly, God bless the great country of Texas.